50 grand in cold, hard cash sat inside a bulletproof glass case, completely untouched for 6 months. Elite athletes, fitness influencers, and parkour champions had all left on stretchers. Then, an 80-year-old man wearing faded combat boots stepped up to the starting line and shattered every law of human biology. The Mojave Desert sun was merciless, baking the cracked earth until it felt like the surface of an anvil. Standing at the center of a massive custom-built compound was Garrison Brooks, a 29-year-old fitness mogul whose ego was matched only by his multi-million-dollar empire. Garrison was built like a Greek statue, all bulging veins and synthetic tan, pacing back and forth with a microphone gripped tightly in his hand. Behind him towered his masterpiece, the Leviathan. It wasn't just an obstacle course. It was a 400-meter gauntlet of engineered torture. Garrison had spent $2 million designing a track specifically meant to break the human spirit. For 6 months he had run an open challenge, live-streamed to his millions of followers. The rules were simple. Finish the course in under 4 minutes, and the $50,000, sitting in the clear acrylic display case at the finish line, was yours. Nobody had even come close. 3 minutes and 45 seconds, Garrison barked into the microphone, his voice booming over the PA system. He pointed a muscular arm toward the mud-soaked field where a 25-year-old man was currently dry-heaving into a bucket. That's how long it took our latest challenger, a 2-time regional CrossFit champion, to completely tear his rotator cuff on the Goliath rings. Let's give a round of applause for Bradley, folks. But the Leviathan remains undefeated. The crowd, a sweaty mass of several hundred spectators and hopeful competitors, offered a weak smattering of applause. The paramedics were already rushing onto the field to strap the agonizing Bradley onto a backboard. Garrison turned to one of the 6 high-definition cameras, tracking his every move. Listen to me, chat. I told you. I designed this course using biomechanical analysis. I found the exact points where human lactic acid buildup causes total muscular failure, and I placed a brutal obstacle right at those intersections. Human evolution simply hasn't caught up to my mind. The course was a nightmare, divided into 4 zones. Zone 1 was the bone grinder, a chaotic sprint through deep, shifting sand that immediately transitioned into a 15-foot warped wall, angled to punish the knees. Zone 2 was the Trench of Regret, a 60-foot low crawl under real, rusted barbed wire, through mud that Garrison purposely chilled with bags of ice every hour. Zone 3 was the Goliath rings, a set of wildly swinging, irregularly spaced iron rings suspended over a 10-foot drop into a pit of stagnant water. And finally, the Soul Crusher, a vertical 30-foot rope climb to the buzzer. But there was a catch. Competitors had to strap a 50-pound lead-filled vest to their chest before starting the ascent. It was the final day of the 6-month challenge. The sun was beginning its slow dip toward the jagged horizon. Garrison wiped a speck of dust from his designer sunglasses and smiled at his lead producer, Melissa. "Wrap it up after the next hour," Garrison muttered, covering the microphone. "Nobody else is going to try. The hype is peaking. We'll end the stream with me holding the money, proving I'm the only alpha left." "We have one more registered," Melissa said, looking down at her tablet, her brow furrowing. "But, Garrison, you might want to look at this. It has to be a troll or a liability issue." Garrison scoffed. "A liability? Everyone signs the waiver. If they snap a femur, it just makes for a better YouTube thumbnail. Who is it? Another gymnast?" "No," Melissa said, pointing toward the gravel parking lot just outside the compound's chain-link fencing. Him. Garrison turned. Through the shimmering heat waves radiating off the dirt, an old, rusted 1990 Ford F-150 was idling by the gate. The engine rattled with a deep, metallic cough before shutting off. The driver's side door creaked open, and a pair of scuffed, heavy leather boots hit the dirt. The man who stepped out didn't look like an athlete. He looked like a ghost. He was incredibly thin, but not frail. He possessed the kind of dense, raw-bone lean that suggested decades of hard labor or severe rations. His posture was unnervingly straight, like a steel rod had been fused to his spine. He wore faded olive-drab cargo pants, a plain white t-shirt tucked in with military precision, and an old, washed-out green jacket. His skin was the texture of cured saddle leather, deeply lined around piercing, pale blue eyes. He looked to be at least 80 years old. Garrison let out a sharp bark of laughter. He immediately signaled for Cameron, his main cameraman, to follow him. "Oh, this is going to be viral gold. Get the lens on Grandpa. Let's go welcome our newest challenger." As the old man approached the registration tent, the murmurs in the crowd began to ripple. Athletes who were icing their bruised ribs and taping their sprained wrists stared in disbelief. The man didn't walk with the shuffle of the elderly. His footsteps were eerily silent, heel to toe, a predatory skydon completely devoid of wasted motion. Melissa stepped in front of the table, holding her hands up defensively. "Sir, I'm sorry. The spectator stands are over to the left. The registration is closed. I submitted my paperwork online this morning," the man said. His voice was quiet, raspy, like dry leaves dragging across concrete, yet it possessed a strange acoustic weight that demanded absolute silence from anyone listening. "Name's Walter Hayes." Garrison stepped into the frame, flashing his $1,000,000 bleached white smile. "Walter, buddy, did you get lost on the way to the bingo hall? I respect the ambition, truly, but this isn't a senior citizen's walking path. That mud out there is freezing, and the obstacles will literally rip your arms out of their sockets." Walter Hayes didn't look at Garrison's camera. He didn't look at Garrison's smile. He simply stared dead into the young influencer's eyes, and for a split second, Garrison felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. There was nothing behind the old man's gaze. No amusement, no fear, no intimidation. Just a flat, calculating void. "I brought my own pen," Walter said, pulling a cheap ballpoint from his breast pocket. "Where is the waiver?" "Sir, legally, I don't think I can let you—" Melissa started, looking panicked. "Let him sign it," Garrison interrupted, his ego instantly overriding his common sense. The live chat on Cameron's monitor was exploding with comments. Viewers were pouring in by the tens of thousands to watch the spectacle of the delusional grandpa. If Walter wants a shot at the 50K, who are we to deny a patriot? You served, Walter. Navy, Army. "I did a little traveling," Walter replied softly, signing the dense legal document with a steady hand. He didn't bother reading the clauses about dismemberment or cardiac arrest. Garrison leaned into the camera. "You heard it here, folks. Walter Hayes is about to take on the Leviathan. Medics, stay frosty. We might need the defibrillator on standby." The crowd laughed nervously. A few people yelled out for Walter to stop, to go home, not wanting to watch an elderly man break his neck on live internet television. Walter ignored them all. He unzipped his green jacket, folded it with meticulous care, and placed it on the registration table. Beneath the white t-shirt, the outline of his arms revealed skin mapped with thick, jagged, white scars. A faded, barely recognizable tattoo sat on his right forearm, something involving a skull and a knife, the ink blurred by half a century of sun and time. He walked to the starting line. Garrison stood next to the giant digital timer, holding the air horn. "All right, Walt. You've got 4 minutes. If you need to tap out, just wave your hand, okay? No shame in quitting." Walter didn't take a traditional sprinter's stance. He didn't stretch. He didn't shake out his muscles. He simply stood at the line, his feet shoulder-width apart, his arms hanging loose at his sides. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He took one deep, slow breath in through his nose and let it out through his mouth. 3, 2, 1. Garrison squeezed the air horn. The sharp blast shattered the desert air. What happened next defied every principle of sports science Garrison had ever learned. Walter did not sprint into the deep sand of the bone grinder. Sprinting in sand causes feet to sink, expending massive amounts of kinetic energy. Instead, Walter dropped his center of gravity and moved with a terrifying, scuttling stride. Wide steps, striking the sand with the flat of his midfoot, displacing the weight perfectly. He glided over the shifting terrain as if he were walking on a paved sidewalk. "What? How is he doing that?" Melissa whispered, watching the monitor. Walter reached the 15-foot warped wall. The young athletes had relied on explosive speed, running vertically up the curve and leaping desperately to catch the lip. Walter didn't do that. He hit the curve at a bizarre, oblique angle. He ran across the slope, using the centrifugal force to carry him upward, and instead of jumping, he extended his arm, hooking his elbow precisely over the steel edge in a brutal, bone-locking grip. He didn't try to pull himself up with his biceps. He swung his right leg up, hooked his heel onto the ledge, and rolled his entire body over the top in one fluid mechanical rotation. It took him exactly 7 seconds to clear Zone 1. The current record held by the CrossFit champion was 12. The crowd went dead silent. The mockery evaporated. Garrison lowered the microphone, his mouth hanging slightly open. Wait, no, that's a fluke." Walter dropped from the back of the wall and approached the trench of regret. This was where the muscle-bound competitors failed. The 60-foot crawl under rusted wire and ice mud restricted chest expansion, causing panic and rapid muscle fatigue. Walter hit the mud before the wire even started. He went completely prone, flattening his ancient frame into the freezing slush. And then he engaged in a perfect, horrifyingly military low crawl. But it wasn't the crawl of a basic trainee. It was the frantic, hyper-efficient, survival-driven movement of a man who had spent his life evading tracer fire in jungles, where stopping meant death. He didn't use his knees. He used the insides of his boots and the points of his elbows, undulating his hips to slide through the thick mud like a serpent. He didn't gasp for air when the ice-cold water hit his chest. His face remained an emotionless mask, his eyes locked dead ahead. He didn't just crawl through the trench. He tore through it. The heavy barbed wire hung just inches above his back, but his clothes never snagged. He knew exactly how much space he occupied in the world. He understood the geometry of his own body with a mastery that took a lifetime of deadly stakes to acquire. "Camera 2, get a close-up on his face," Garrison yelled, panic suddenly threading through his voice. He looked up at the giant digital clock, 0:48 seconds. Walter emerged from the mud at the end of the trench. Most competitors took a moment here to wipe the freezing slush from their eyes, to take a gasping breath, to prepare for the Goliath rings. Walter didn't stop moving. He didn't even blink the mud away. As he rose to his feet, dripping with the frigid slurry, he broke into a measured, rhythmic jog toward Zone 3. He wasn't breathing heavily. He was employing a tactical breathing technique. 2 short inhales through the nose, 1 long exhale through the mouth, forcing oxygen into his bloodstream, forcefully lowering his own heart rate mid-sprint. He arrived at the edge of the water pit. Suspended above were the Goliath rings, swinging erratically in the desert wind. This obstacle required immense upper body strength, grip endurance, and momentum control. Walter stood at the edge, the muddy water lapping at the concrete below him. The crowd was completely transfixed. Nobody was cheering. They were holding their breath, paralyzed by the sheer anomaly unfolding before their eyes. Garrison stared at the timer. 1:05. Walter Hayes was not just surviving the Leviathan. He was systematically dismantling it, and the worst was yet to come. The 80-year-old veteran raised his scarred hands, locked his pale eyes on the first swinging ring, and leapt. Walter leapt. His scarred, calloused hands clamped onto the cold, rusted iron of the first Goliath ring. The metal groaned under his sudden, transferring weight. For the younger, muscle-bound athletes who had tackled this course over the past 6 months, the strategy here was always rooted in brute force. They would pull up, lock their massive biceps, and desperately throw their bodies forward toward the next swinging ring, constantly fighting gravity and burning out their fast-twitch muscle fibers within seconds. Walter did not fight gravity. He partnered with it, as his initial momentum carried him forward over the pit of dark, stagnant water. His legs swung up in a tight, perfectly executed pike position. He wasn't relying on upper body strength alone to bridge the gap. He was utilizing kinetic transfer, a biomechanical technique drilled into the deepest, most permanent recesses of his muscle memory. Decades ago, under the command of real-life military legends like Colonel Robert Howard in the highly classified triple canopy jungles of Southeast Asia, Walter had learned how to traverse ravines on single ropes while under heavy enemy fire. To him, this obstacle was child's play. Walter's body acted as a flawless human pendulum. As he reached the exact apex of his forward swing, hovering briefly in a moment of weightlessness, he released his right hand. He didn't desperately lunge to grab the next ring. Instead, he simply sapped the edge of it with his open palm, pushing the heavy iron forward to set it swinging in rhythm with his own body, and then caught it smoothly on the return. It was a staggering, almost hypnotic display of spatial awareness. He moved from ring to ring with the mechanical, relentless efficiency of a metronome. The live chat on Cameron's main broadcasting monitor instantly blurred into an unreadable, chaotic waterfall of text. "He's a literal machine. Who is this guy? Is he a Terminator? Garrison is sweating right now, LMAO. The ego is crumbling." Garrison was, in fact, sweating profusely. The synthetic tan on his forehead was slick with cold, nervous perspiration. He grabbed his heavy-duty walkie-talkie from his tactical belt, his knuckles turning pure white as he gripped the plastic. "Melissa," he hissed into the receiver, stepping away from the boom mic. "Check the rig on ring number 7. Check it right now." Ring number 7 was Garrison's dirty little secret. It wasn't officially documented in any of the blueprints or rulebooks, but the thick steel chain suspending it was attached to a specialized, remote-controlled breakaway carabiner. When a competitor grabbed it, the ring was designed to instantly drop exactly 6 inches. It wasn't enough to technically classify as a broken obstacle, but the sudden, violent jolt of downward momentum was mathematically calculated to snap a competitor's grip, immediately tearing the skin from their palms and plunging them into the freezing water below. It was the course's ultimate insurance policy to protect the $50,000. "Ring 7 is primed," Melissa whispered through the radio earpiece, her voice trembling with genuine concern. "Garrison, please, if he gets hurt. He's an old man. The liability is astronomical." "Shut up and make sure the primary cameras are rolling," Garrison spat back, his eyes darting frantically between Walter and the giant digital timer. Walter was moving with a mesmerizing, terrifying rhythm. Grab, swing, release, catch. His tactical breathing was fully audible through the highly sensitive boom mics surrounding the water pit, a rhythmic, locomotive hiss that echoed across the quiet desert. Hiss. Hiss. Ha! He reached the 6th ring. He swung his lean body forward, his pale, emotionless eyes locked dead onto the rusted iron of the 7th ring. He released. He soared across the empty air, his calloused hands extending toward the target. His long fingers wrapped securely around the bottom curve of the thick iron. Clank! From a hidden control panel, the breakaway carabiner forcefully disengaged. Ring 7 dropped 6 vertical inches with a violent, spine-jarring snap. The crowd gasped as one collective entity. Melissa covered her mouth in absolute horror. Garrison's eyes widened in malicious anticipation, waiting for the inevitable splash. The sudden, vicious drop sent a massive shockwave of kinetic force directly upward into Walter's extended right arm. A sickening, wet pop echoed sharply over the PA system, loud enough to make the paramedics on standby wince. The old veteran's right arm instantly went entirely slack, violently pulled completely out of its shoulder socket by the sheer, sudden force of his own falling body weight, combined with the rigged drop. He stopped swinging, dangling precariously over the pit, held up only by his left hand, gripping the 6th ring tightly, his right arm hanging uselessly, limply by his side. The digital timer flashed mercilessly in the desert sun. 1:42. "Oh my God, he totally dislocated it," Cameron whispered from behind the heavy camera lens, his hands shaking slightly. "Garrison, we have to stop the clock. We need to get the medics out there, now." Garrison stepped forward confidently, trying to expertly mask his overwhelming relief with faux, theatrical concern for his live stream audience. He raised the microphone to his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the Leviathan has claimed yet another victim." Walter Hayes did not fall into the water. He hung there, suspended over the pit, his breathing suddenly ragged and shallow, his square jaw clenched so fiercely it looked like it was carved from solid granite. He didn't look back at Garrison. He didn't look down at the crowd. He looked calmly and clinically at his own completely dislocated right shoulder. Slowly, impossibly, Walter began to swing his legs again. He painstakingly generated a tiny, agonizing pendulum motion, with his left arm screaming under the immense, torturous strain of holding his entire body weight. He swung his body sideways toward the rigid, galvanized steel scaffolding pole that structurally supported the entire ring apparatus. "What is he doing?" Someone in the front row of the bleachers screamed in utter disbelief. Walter's heavy combat boots hit the scaffolding pole. He firmly planted his heels against the steel, pushing backward with his leg muscles to create a sharp, taut angle. Then, in a moment of pure, unadulterated madness that would immediately be clipped, shared, and rewatched tens of millions of times across the internet, Walter slammed his severely dislocated right shoulder directly and brutally into the thick steel upright of the obstacle frame. A horrific, fleshy crunch echoed aggressively across the desert compound, causing several spectators to physically turn away. Walter let out a single, guttural, animalistic grunt. His shoulder forcibly popped right back into the joint. The crowd erupted into absolute, uncontained pandemonium. People were screaming hysterically, grabbing their heads in sheer disbelief, jumping up and down. Melissa completely dropped her clipboard onto the dirt. Garrison backed away several steps, his jaw literally unhinged, dropping his expensive microphone straight into the dust. Walter didn't pause to recover. He didn't celebrate his medical miracle. He instantly threw his newly relocated right arm upward, grabbed ring 7 firmly, and seamlessly resumed his forward swing. His pace was noticeably slower now. Bright red blood was actively seeping from the heavily torn skin on his palms, staining the iron rings a rusty crimson with every consecutive grab. But he absolutely did not stop. He methodically cleared the 8th ring, the 9th, the 10th. At exactly 2:15, Walter Hayes's wet combat boots hit the solid, painted wooden platform at the end of Zone 3. He had survived the Goliath rings, utterly defeating Garrison's rigged trap. The desert wind howled aggressively across the compound perimeter, but inside the main arena, the atmosphere remained suffocatingly tense. Only one impossible obstacle remained before the finish line: the 30-foot vertical hemp rope climb to the final red buzzer, and the dreaded 50-pound lead filled tactical vest. Walter walked toward this final station. His right arm noticeably hung slightly lower than his left. The surrounding muscles were twitching violently from the severe trauma of the brutal shoulder relocation. His faded cargo pants were soaked with freezing mud. His shirt clung to his torso. Standing ominously next to the dangling rope was the massive black vest. It sat mockingly on a custom wooden pedestal designed to break the will of anyone who approached it. Garrison hurriedly snatched up his microphone. His voice registered an octave higher than its usual arrogant tone. "Okay, chat, this is it. Walter has somehow made it further than any man alive. But human anatomy has definitive limits. That vest weighs 50 solid pounds. He weighs maybe 140 pounds, soaking wet. The biological math simply does not work. The human heart cannot pump enough oxygen to climb." Walter reached the wooden pedestal. He reached out slowly with his left hand. He firmly grabbed the thick nylon shoulder strap of the weighted vest. He aggressively dragged it off the wood. The sheer weight of it immediately pulled his rigid posture downward. A man sitting in the front row of the spectator bleachers suddenly stood up. This older gentleman proudly wore a faded veteran baseball cap. He pointed a shaking finger directly at the blurred tattoo on the exposed forearm of Walter. The ink was now clearly visible and magnified on the giant screens flanking the obstacle course layout. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. That is the Ghost Unit. They ran highly classified operations across the fence. My older brother used to tell ghost stories about those guys. They were not regular soldiers. They were literal phantoms. Garrison looked sharply at the old man in the stands. Pure panic finally pierced his thick armor of ego. The $50,000, sitting securely in the bulletproof case, suddenly felt very vulnerable. Walter wrestled the heavy restrictive vest over his broad shoulders. The 50 pounds of dense lead instantly crushed down violently on his tired, aged chest cavity. He quickly fastened the 3 heavy polymer buckles. He stood perfectly still before the thick, punishing hemp rope. It stretched 30 feet straight up into the blazing desert sky. At the very top, a large red buzzer waited patiently. The massive digital clock ticked mercilessly downward. 2 minutes and 38 seconds. He had less than a minute and a half to climb 30 vertical feet with an extra 50 pounds strapped tightly to his chest. Walter grabbed the rope. His actively bleeding palms deeply stained the pale hemp fibers. He jumped upward and pulled his worn knees incredibly high. Younger athletes relied heavily on their biceps for rope climbs. This rapidly burned out their upper bodies before reaching the halfway mark. Walter intelligently used the classic energy-efficient hook technique. He masterfully wrapped the thick rope around the outside of his right leg. He locked it into place by stepping on it with his left foot. He created a flawless mechanical clamp. He stood up directly on the rope. He actively utilized the massive enduring muscles of his legs to drive his vertical ascent. Stand, reach, clamp, stand. His flawless technique was a literal masterclass in pure mechanical efficiency. But his elderly body was rapidly failing. The 50-pound lead vest was a suffocating anchor. Every single time he forcefully pushed up his severely compromised right shoulder, ground painfully against the joint. His weathered face finally betrayed the overwhelming agony. His cracked lips peeled back in a primal grimace. He was exactly 10 feet up the rope. "He is slowing down," yelled Garrison aggressively into the microphone. "The rapid lactic acid buildup is freezing his muscles. He is hitting the wall, folks." At 15 feet, Walter abruptly stopped moving. His iron grip visibly and terrifyingly faltered under intense strain. The heavy rope slipped a crucial inch through his bloody hands. The entire crowd went completely silent. Walter hung there, suspended effortlessly, 20 feet in the air. A 50-pound vest actively dragged him down toward the unforgiving, hard concrete floor below. His pale blue eyes squeezed tightly shut. He remembered carrying the lifeless, heavy body of his young radio man out of a blistering hot landing zone. The crushing weight of the radio equipment nearly broke his spine. He remembered the sacred binding promise he had solemnly made to a grieving young widow decades ago. Walter roared with absolute fury. He drove his heavy combat boots violently down onto the clamped rope. His bloody hands shot aggressively upward. He exploded upward toward the buzzer. 20 feet. 25 feet. The overwhelming physical fatigue miraculously vanished. It was instantly replaced by a massive adrenal dump so potent it defied all medical science. 3 minutes and 5 seconds. "No," shrieked Garrison, hysterically dropping the expensive microphone. "Somebody pull the rope down now." Melissa flatly refused to move. Walter fiercely reached 28 feet. He bolted his boots into the final secure hook. He released the thick rope with his left bloody hand. He slammed his open palm fiercely onto the red buzzer. 3 minutes and 12 seconds. The entire compound erupted in absolute disbelief. Walter methodically rappelled back down. He shattered the expensive acrylic case with one swing of his heavy boot. He grabbed the canvas bag holding the cash. Melissa ran frantically after him. "Please, just one word. Why did you do it?" Walter paused by his rusted truck. "My old platoon leader has a sick relative who desperately needs a bone marrow transplant. Insurance refused to cover the deductible. Now they will." The old man drove away into the heat. The Leviathan was built to break the human spirit, but it never accounted for the indestructible iron will of a true American ghost. Walter Hayes proved that real strength isn't built in a gym. It's forged in the fires of survival. If this legendary 80-year-old veteran's insane, record-breaking run inspired you today, hit that like button. Share this video to show the world what true grit looks like. And subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable, reality-shattering stories. Never surrender.